Hi, this is Teddy, and today you're listening to Rania Batrice from the Blue Texas PAC on Two Broads Talking Politics. Stay safe, y'all.
Are you listening?
Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast family of podcasts. And I am on today with Rania Batrice, who is a longtime political policy and advocacy strategist, was a deputy campaign manager for Bernie Sanders in 2016. And today we're going to talk about Texas and the Blue Texas PAC. So hello, Rania.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me today. So I mentioned that you've got a lot of history in working in politics. Could you talk just a little bit about that to kind of set the stage for the conversation?
Sure, absolutely. So I've spent about 20 years. I started when I was in college working in this space of politics and advocacy. The policy side came a little bit later, but I'm a native Texan. I'm from Lubbock, Texas, and I'm based in Dallas now, but I've worked all over the country at every level, from mayoral races to gubernatorial races to House, Senate, and of course, presidential races as well. These days I work more on the federal side than anything else, but throughout all of those years, I've had this dream of bringing these things together: politics, policy, and advocacy, and sort of breaking open the traditional silos that sometimes exist within these worlds. And so, yeah, that's what I do today.
So Texas, of course, is like this gleaming gem that Democrats have been trying to break for a while now. I know in 2016 people talked a lot about, well, Texas turned blue, and then of course in 2018 with Beto's campaign for Senate, that was a big topic of conversation. So tell me why, first of all, why Texas is so important in politics, in federal politics, and then we can sort of talk about why we think it is flippable.
So every state is important in its own way, of course, and every state has its own quirks, of course, and unique aspects to it. Texas is an enormous state, and sometimes people who haven't been here don't quite grasp how large it is. But because it's so vast, I mean, there's sort of everything here, as far as everything from topography to political beliefs to just the different types of areas. Of course, we have rural and urban and everything in between. And so, but on the federal level, presidential level in particular, there are 38 electoral votes here. So that is obviously hugely, hugely important when it comes to the presidential race. And you're right, it has been the thing that folks have been talking about for a long time. And we have seen shifts happening all over the state over the years. And Beto actually is the one who said it over and over and over again. It's not that Texas is a red state. It's that Texas historically has been a non-voting state. And I think there is a certain pragmatism and populism here that we have seen for a very long time, but largely has been ignored in some ways. And so I think there's been a bit more of a focus. We've had some really fantastic dynamic candidates running up and down the ballot. And so it's sort of been setting the stage for this moment we're in right now, right this second, where 2020 feels like it could actually happen. The time is now.
So obviously you mentioned Texas is an enormous place and has everything, but what are some of the issues that are really driving Texas voters or driving people to not vote as much? What are the kinds of things that people in Texas in general, obviously that's a very broad question, but are really concerned with?
And I don't, it's not one thing or another. I think that different areas have different topics and issue areas that they're really tuned into. I do think it's not a new issue, but it has just been exacerbated with a global pandemic. But I think healthcare is something that a lot of folks are thinking about all across the state. Of course, immigration is something that folks are thinking about all across the state as well, just given everything that happened. It sometimes feels like it was a million years ago that kids were being ripped out of their parents' hands and being locked in cages and all of those kinds of things. It really wasn't that long ago. And by the way, it's still happening. And so that is something that is top of mind for a lot of folks. And having been to and just helped out at some of the respite centers in both the southern part of the state and out west, it was a gut-wrenching. It is a gut-wrenching situation that just sadly has sort of taken a back burner, just because it's like whack-a-mole right now, trying to keep up with all of the different things that are going on. But the other thing in Texas too, and not just in Texas, but we are talking about Texas, so I'll stick to that, is so often things that come up it seemed like they come up to the federal level start at the state level. So there's a state legislature here that has done all kinds of damage to everything from, again, healthcare and access and Medicaid expansion and all of those kinds of things. And then, access to the very important services that Planned Parenthood provides, for example, or voting disenfranchisement that happens. Those voter ID laws, which happened in Texas, happened at the state legislative level. Same thing with gerrymandering and all those kinds of things that really do have a federal effect, but they happen at the state level. So, all of these things have happened. They've all happened here. And so there are a lot of things that have sort of been percolating all across the state. And again, it's not like every part of the state cares about exactly the same things, but there are some issues that have just been just exacerbated by actions taken at the local level, and again, by the global pandemic and the inaction taken by some of the state leadership.
What are some of the reasons that Texas is potentially flippable? Let's go beyond potentially. Is going to flip this year.
There we go. Yeah, put it out into the universe.
So, in 2016, it wasn't a big gap, but it was still a sizable gap. In 2018, Beto came really, really close to beating Ted Cruz in that Senate race. What are the reasons that it could get over the top this year? And what are some of the things that have to happen to make that actually occur?
There's a demographic shift that's been happening in Texas. It's no secret. Part of the problem, and I probably will get in trouble for saying this, but I don't care. Good trouble, right? There's just been this habit of talking about those shifts, but then not actually communicating with people. And that's a problem. And honestly, it's one of the things that Beto did so well was he got out to those areas that have largely been ignored by Democrats, especially for years and years and years. And I used to joke that, it's not like the little blue election elves are going to come and all of a sudden flip things. Like, we actually have to do the work and make the investments and have the conversations and make sure people feel seen and heard. And that's true across the country. People want to be seen and heard. And it's true here in Texas. And so I feel like has been part of the problem, is just taking things for granted in both sides of what that could mean. Taking things for granted is like, somebody's just going to fall in line, or they're not quote unquote our people. So we're not going to have those conversations, which is ridiculous. So I do think that this groundwork that we've seen laid with Beto and others is going out into these areas, having these conversations, having a seat at the table for everyone. And while we may not agree on exactly how we're going to get to a certain place, there tends to be an agreement that we care about humanity. And I oftentimes talk about how the labels can get us into trouble. And when really we're talking about issues of humanity. Do you care about your neighbor, your family, somebody maybe you don't even know, but just as a fellow human being, you care about them. And so, having those conversations and finding that common ground is really, really, really important. And also asking people for their vote. It sounds so simple, but it's important, and it gets put on the back burner sometimes. And so I think this work has been done. This groundwork has been being laid. Can I do that to the English language? You know what I mean? For several cycles now, and we're sort of at this tipping point where the work doesn't stop. We have to keep doing it. We have to keep communicating. We have to keep getting into these areas and making sure people understand that we care, of course, safely, as we are still battling COVID, but not taking anything for granted. And like I said, still having those conversations. And that's kind of honestly why Blue Texas PAC came about, was to sort of help amplify the communication and really utilize research and media to amplify these things that we stand for and care about. And we are focused primarily, I guess you could say, at the top of the ticket, but there are down ballot implications. Of course, we want people to show up, and again, I say show up. That might be vote by mail. That might be absentee. It might be in person. Whatever it is the safest for folks right now in this delicate time. But we really, really want to make sure these conversations continue to happen and are being pushed to the forefront, especially as we come into November.
And how do you focus on something like that in the midst of a pandemic? So much of what Beto's campaign was about, for instance, was like just driving around Texas and talking to people in large groups. What does that mean right now when some of that kind of organizing can't happen, but it's still so important for people to be having those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is where folks have gotten really creative, and it's wonderful to see the creativity that's come out of it. Obviously, things have become very, very virtual in a lot of ways. So there's not sort of the grassroots organizing in the traditional sense that we would have probably seen if we weren't in the middle of a global pandemic. But, there are virtual phone banks happening. There's not door knocking happening in the way it usually does, but some folks are doing lit drops. And then again, leveraging the tools that we have at our disposal. So media, both being on television and digital as well, become increasingly important too, as folks are inside much more than they ever have been before. And that is why, we feel like that's a very, very important piece of this, just to your point that, this does not look like a standard election cycle in any way, shape, or form. So we have to communicate in every way possible.
Is that a particular challenge in a state that, as you noted, is just a state that doesn't vote that much? I think it's pretty clear that if everyone in Texas turned out and voted, it probably would have been a blue state a long time ago. And there's lots of systemic reasons for that. It's not individuals just deciding not to vote. But, how do you counteract that, make sure that people are really inspired to go out and vote and to maybe stand in lines because there is voter suppression, or, do whatever they need to do to get the ID that is so hard to get, in a state that has put so many barriers up against voting. What does it look like to counteract that?
So part of that is education, right? And understanding what you need to do in order to vote. And you're exactly right. The barriers that have been put in place are very intentional and oppressive, it's oppressive on purpose. And so just making sure people know what they need and how to go about it. And again, not even just because of the voter suppression, but because of COVID, just making sure folks understand what voting looks like this cycle is really important. And that educational piece has been being pushed for quite some time now by several entities, by the state party, by other organizations and things like that, just making sure people know. And then the other thing too, again, is just to take advantage of the fact that people are home and we can reach them a little bit more readily than we might be able to before. So making sure they understand you don't have to vote on election day. You have some time before if that seems a little scary, whether it's for health reasons or whatever the case may be, you have some options. So really capitalizing on the voter education piece of it is really important. But then also, to your point of what kind of inspires people to show up, I think that the systemic inequality and the systemic issues that have been rampant in this country and across the state for generations, quite frankly, they're not new. Again, they've been around forever and ever, but they are being exacerbated. And people are much more aware now, I think, than before of the realities that folks are facing. And it's not so distant anymore. I think sometimes, it's easy to change the proverbial channel, if you will. It's like, oh, it's not me. That's not my story. I'm going to focus in on work, kids, family, all the things that are hugely important. But people are really having to sort of face these issues much more directly than I think they were before, and are starting to recognize the importance of elections. I mean, who sits in those seats is massively important. We know that. We've known that, but everybody else has not had that same connection to it, of why it's so important, of who is representing us and are they actually showing up and representing us. And I think that's just become much more clear, sadly, than it ever was before, because of, just like I said, all of these issues have just been amplified and exacerbated.
So I know that some number of our listeners are, probably a lot of them are pretty progressive, and we're maybe people who supported Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders in the primary. As someone who worked on the Bernie campaign, what do you think are the salient messages that can get people who are very progressive really interested and invested in voting for the Biden-Harris ticket?
Yeah, and I often talk about, I am obviously a die-hard progressive. I mean, I have been my whole life. I grew up in a very conservative family, so have sort of bucked the norms in the system for a very long time, and I'm just very committed to progressive values. That being said, I think, and again, having worked in politics for 20 years, there's sometimes this rhetoric about the most important election of our lifetime that happens every single cycle. But really, this is the most important election of our lifetime. And a friend of mine often says this campaign, electing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, is not the period. It is the comma in the whole process and the whole cycle. Mm-hmm. So we have to fight. We have to push to get them elected. And then we continue to push to get our values represented even more. And I will say, I've worked closely with a lot of the Biden folks before and even more recently. And he has moved left on some things. And yes, there are still things that we want to push him even further on, that are, issues around climate and things like that, where we just know we can't wait. Science has told us we don't have the luxury of waiting any longer. And he has moved already on several important things. And there's more to do. There's more work to do. And that's the reality. But the extension of that reality is we can have a conversation with somebody who believes in science. that's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And science is just one example, although I'm a believer that everything kind of comes back to science in one way or another. We're not going to have that conversation with Donald Trump. That is just the reality. And we need to be operating in the reality. And again, it doesn't mean that the work is over after November 3rd. No, we are just getting started, but we have to fight like hell to get Biden and Harris elected. Otherwise, we're kind of in just a lot of trouble, to put it mildly.
Yeah. So what can our listeners do to support the Blue Texas PAC and to really help make sure that Texas goes blue? Because as we know, Democrats don't necessarily need Texas to win the Electoral College, but Republicans cannot win without it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if folks would go to bluetexaspac.com, there's a place to donate there, a place to contact us, a place to just learn more about our mission and what we're doing. Please check us out. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And then just separately, but equally important, please check your voter registration, make sure you're registered to vote, and make a plan. Make a plan to vote. And then once you've done that, holler at your family and your friends and your neighbors and make sure they're doing the same, because it really, like, all hands on deck. We got to get it done.
My family and friends might be a little sick of me doing that, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway.
Good. I love to hear it. That's great.
Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure we talk about today?
No, I think we covered it. We did a good job in, less than 30 minutes. Go us.
I'm a big believer that the right size for a conversation is the size it takes. There's some podcasts out there that go for 2-3 hours, and I just,
yeah,
we're busy people.
Absolutely.
We got things to do.
Exactly.
Well, Rania, thank you so much for speaking with me today. This was really great. I have been fired up about Texas for a while, and I think this is it. I think this is the year it's going to happen.
Absolutely. Same, obviously. But, I'm a little biased. I'm from here. But yes, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.